Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to give a few moments for people to join the meeting. If you've noticed, we've made this a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. And that's because I like to have these webinars a little bit more informal. I like that everybody's muted and has their video off. Maybe at the end, if you have questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and take your video off and even ask them yourself or put your question in the chat. I would really appreciate if everybody could let me know where they're calling in from, maybe your name, where you're from, if you're a producer or a manager, or if you're from an organization. Again, my name's Shaleas Harrison. I'm the policy manager for the Western Landowners Alliance and excited to talk about Grassland CRP and the Signup this year with all of you. Just an FYI, this is a recorded meeting and it will be available online after this on our website. We'll share that with everybody that has been registered. So know that that is going to be coming out. All right, I'm going to get us started. Thanks everybody for joining. Really exciting that everybody's here. We had over 150 people register for this webinar. So that tells me there's a lot of interest in Grassland Conservation Reserve Program. I'm calling in from Cody, Wyoming, and I'm the Western Policy Manager for the Western Landowners Alliance. If you don't already know, WLA is a landowner-formed and landowner-led organization. We're dedicated to keeping working lands whole and healthy for the benefit of both people and wildlife. We recognize the economic vitality and conservation of these lands, and both of those things go hand in hand, both the economics, the ag, and the conservation part of all of that. And much of our work, and my work specifically, is to support, share, and fine-tune the tools and services that support landowners and managers in the conservation and stewardship of their private lands. And Grassland CRP is one of these programs. We've heard a lot of interest across the West about this program, and frankly, landowners love it. They really deserve to be rewarded for their stewardship. And just a quick overview of the program, which Patrick Lewis, a panelist, will get into a little bit later. Grassland CRP is a voluntary working lands program managed through the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, that contracts with producers and operators to protect grasslands. And that includes sagebrush grasslands, rangeland, pasture land, and wildlife habitat, while also maintaining the area as grazing land. So haying and grazing can still continue. And that's, again, why this program is so popular. So in exchange for maintaining grasslands, the FSA pays producers an annual rental rate and cost share assistance while allowing livestock production to continue. So with that, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. And before I pass it to Patrick, please let me know where you're calling in from. At the end of the presentations from Patrick and Jim, we will have a robust Q&A, and you're welcome to unmute yourself or dump your question in the chat. And Lewis, our communications director, will filter that to me, and I will be sure to ask your question to either of the panelists. So Patrick, would you mind introducing yourself? Thank you.
Sure. So my name's Patrick Lewis. I am the acting Grassland CRP program manager for the Farm Service Agency. I'm based in Washington State, up against the Canadian border on a hay and cattle ranch. So this is near and dear to my heart as well. And I'm happy to be able to speak with you all today about the program.
Glad to have you, Patrick. I think this is your third webinar with us, maybe fourth?
Yeah, something like that. This will be the third sign up that I have run, either full or in part. And I think I've spoken with you all for all those and then assisted on one or two before that. So no, it's great to be able to provide information and answer questions. These conversations have always been very, very good from helping out, like you were saying, get interested and see what we can do with the program for sure.
Thanks. Jim, and we can't see you, Jim. Okay, there you are.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Jim Armendariz, and I'm the state range specialist for NRCS in New Mexico. And my family is also ranchers in New Mexico and have since enrolled, since the program came about, we've enrolled a portion of the ranch, the acres that were eligible in Grassland CRP. And we're also big fans of the program.
So Jim is going to be wearing two hats today. He's going to be an NRCS expert and a landowner with experience in the program. And appreciate you being here, Jim, and giving us your expertise in both of those arenas. Okay, one more time, if everybody could just make sure that they remain muted, and you're welcome to keep your video off so we just see the panelist on the screen here. So Brian, I see you right now. I don't mean to kick you off, but would you mind putting your video off until you have questions at the end? That would be great. Thank you. Okay, Patrick, I'm going to kick it off to you to provide an overview of the program. And yeah, go take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. So as Shaleas mentioned, Grassland CRP is an offshoot of the Conservation Reserve Program. It's part of our larger private land conservation framework that we offer nationwide. As of right now, we have a 27 million acre statutory cap that encapsulates, I think there's 5 or 6 variants of CRP that we offer. We started the year at about 25.8 million. So we have very little room under the cap to house everything in our signups this year. That means that this is going to be a competitive grassland signup. The last 3 signups have averaged about 4.5 million acres offered. And then we have taken, I believe we took a high of about 2.5 million 3 signups ago. And as we've gotten closer to the cap each year, we've come down a little bit in what we were able to accept. As Shaleas mentioned, this is our working lands program. It furthers the agency's commitment to the stewardship of critical grassland habitats throughout the nation. And the way that we do that is we take areas that are currently in grass and we keep them in grass for either a 10 or 15 year period. FSA offers an annual rental rate, and that's something that I'll get into here in just a minute about how we calculate that, what's being offered, all that good stuff. We offer that payment every year in October in arrears. And so someone that signs up this year is accepted in, we'll go through ranking, all that good stuff. Their first payment is going to be in October from now. They're going to get anything in October. The other thing that we offer in Grassland CRP is cost share. So just like throughout other parts of CRP, FSA is going to offer a 50% cost share on a variety of items to help facilitate either a grazing management system, potentially a haying system, potentially wildlife habitat, depending on what the goals of your operation, the piece of land that you want to offer into the program, what that looks like. I'm going to be blunt. The majority of our contracts look at grazing, are using some sort of livestock system. So you can kind of game out what that's going to be. We're going to offer cross fencing, interior fencing to help facilitate, rotational grazing, something that might be a little better, healthier for the land, not to impugn anybody's management style, but just to be honest. And then water infrastructure, if we're going to punch a well or we're going to develop a spring, maybe put in underground pipeline, potentially overground pipeline, tanks, troughs, all that good stuff. And then we're going to do some other limited actions as well. And so, let's kind of look at eligibility. There's going to be kind of 2 facets. One is the land has to have the stand on it prior to or at the time of the offer. And so I'm going to pull up the ranking factors fact sheet, which I'm sorry that you'll be looking at a fact sheet, but it's better than my smiling face. Let's be honest. And that's going to look at, you as a potential participant are going to tell us what you think that land has on it. Do you have a monoculture of 1 or 2 species? Do you have a very diverse native grass species? That's going to give you different points looking at what we're doing. And then, the makeup of the participant is pretty open-ended. It's very similar to the rest of our programs. You can be an individual, you can have an entity, LLC, corp, partnership, that sort of thing. There can be multiple people looking at that, participating on the contract. That's not going to be anything that has changed from prior signups or other FSA programs. There has been a couple of major changes between last year's signup and this year's, and I'll go through those in just a minute. The payment structure, I know that the recent legislation, the reconciliation legislation, changed some payment limitation structure for other FSA programs. If you dived into that humongous bill on your own, congratulations. It did not, as best as I can tell today, change the cap for CRP or the payment limitation for CRP. So that payment limitation is $50,000 a year in annual rental payments to an individual or an entity. There are some exceptions for general partnerships and joint ventures. Your local FSA office will love nothing more than to go through that stuff with you. There is no cap on cost share. So if you have a 2,500 acre piece that you get in and you need gobs and gobs of pipeline to make that go, we're good. You know, we're gonna follow the conservation plan that Jim's going to talk about here in a little bit. We're going to provide that 50% cost share where it makes sense for the operation. So let's talk about the ranking process.
Patrick, I want to just make it clear. So if you are a leasee or you are renting land, you can sign up for this program and get the rental payments.
Yes, that's a very good point. So let's talk about that real quick before I get into the rankings. So the participants on the farm can offer to enroll into Grassland CRP. If you are the tenant and you have a handshake lease, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. We talk about who's going to qualify the land. And so the person that qualifies the land gets a share of the rental rate no matter what. So if you have a 10-year lease and you come in and you sign up, you can have 100% of the payment as long as everyone else agrees. The owners on that land, you on that land, however that structure is. If you have a lease that doesn't last the length of the CRP contract, we can have the owner qualify the land. And then, again, you guys all agree on the shares. If you pick up a piece that is in Grassland CRP in 5 years, you can succeed to that contract. We want you to succeed to that contract. And then again, it's going to be a conversation between you and the owner and whoever else might be on that ground as to shares. But you are correct. The CRP shares also do not have to match anything else on that farming operation. So out here, I know crop shares is very popular. If you have a 75-25 on some wheat, and then you're going to take all of the grazing, that's good with us. Everyone has to. We refer to that stuff as landlord tenant, and the policy around that are landlord tenant regulation. And again, as you when you go into the office and you're marking up your maps and you're showing what pieces of ground you want to put in, these are questions that you really do want to ask the county office, and they'll walk you through to make sure that everyone is informed at the time of the offer. And, potentially if you get to move forward in the contract, we have a lot of paper we're going to throw at you. We are a government organization. It's just what we do. But at the same time, we want to go through it and make sure that you understand it, because we don't want there to be a problem on the other side because we didn't have that conversation. So it looks like it came up. There are going to be 6 ranking factors. You will notice that there is not a 2. We go from 1 to 3. That's something I'll talk about. So this is how we look at the offer process. Grassland CRP is competitive, just like general CRP. So everyone that offers in a piece of land, it's going to get a report that shows a score, and then it's all going to get hoovered up at the end of sign up, which right now is going to be through this month, with a 1-week kind of stopgap for us to try and get work done, and then hoover up all of those offers and figure out what's going to happen from there. The first one is going to be the current and future use. If you have a piece of CRP or our old Grassland Reserve Program that is expiring this year, you're going to get some additional points based on that. And then depending on what it is, if it's in grass cover from a CRP, then you're going to get some points there. You'll see this. These are all public fact sheets, so I'm sure WLA will provide these out, or I can provide them out. So that you can kind of review this. Again, the county office will have all the stuff. Our website has this stuff. under the Grassland CRP section. So it's available to peruse. And then we're going to talk about F3, which is maximizing grassland preservation. So the first thing is threat of conversion. This is a map that we have developed, and it's unchanged for Signup 207 over the previous couple of years. And so if we've identified that this grass piece could be converted not only to non-ag use, but to other ag use, i.e. cropland, you're going to get some points based on this. This is not, like I mentioned, this map is sort of, it's been static for the last couple of years. So if something happened recently in your area, this map might not pick up that change. And then the other one is F3B, which is another GIS data layer based map that we utilize, looking at slope and some other factors that is, again, going to pinpoint some things that are happening on your land and may not, and this is also static through signups. So it may not pick up something that has happened in the last, say, 18 months. The next thing is going to be vegetative cover, like I mentioned. So what's actually out there? We start with, what do you think is out there? Like I mentioned, do you have a monoculture stand of introduced wheatgrass? Well, then you're going to get 5 points. But do you think you have a very diverse native plant community out there? You tell us. And if you think that's what's out there, we're going to give you the points based on it. Now, the other side of that conversation is, after the ranking period, if we deem your offer acceptable and you're moving forward to go get a contract, NRCS, Jim's crew, is going to go out and stand on the ground and figure out what's out there. It's not because we don't believe you. It's because that's how we do the plan. And so, if we agree, if Jim's shop agrees and says, yeah, you got exactly what we think you got out there, we keep those points. If NRCS goes out there and, really, you offered 10-point introduced stand, you really won, then we're going to re-rank based on the new information, and we're going to see if you still meet the cutoff score. There are some processes around that, but that's kind of the quick and dirty. So it is important that you are honest with yourself before you come into the office and say, what do I really have out there? Because there is no opportunity under Grassland to plant. We're keeping the grass and grass that is out there at the time of the offer. So, if you have one of these higher point mixes out there, we want to protect it. If you have a lower point mix out there and you get through the ranking process, we want to protect that as well. So it's not necessarily saying we don't want less diverse stands. It's just, we want what's out there. So the next one is going to be S5, which are some environmental factors. I'm going to go over these quickly because that's the last thing that Shaleas wanted me to cover, is the priority areas. But essentially, we have 2 national priority zones. One of them is a big game migratory corridor in Wyoming. Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. And then the other one is it's wind erosion, the traditional Dust Bowl area in 4 states. Below that, I believe Shaleas says she had some maps I believe she's going to share. Those were established with the Farm Bill even prior to the 2018 Farm Bill. Those national areas provide a $5 per acre rental rate incentive. And then each state was able to choose 2 things. Through all of CRP, they have a wildlife priority zone, and those priority zones are going to provide some points in the ranking factors. And then each state was able to provide a grassland zone. So where they think, where they wanted to emphasize grassland conservation, each state was able to do 25% of the rangeland and assign that into a zone. I believe Jim's going to talk about that a little bit as well. So those 2 things those 2 wildlife and grassland zones could provide you points if the majority of your offer exists in those zones. And then the next thing, F6, is small scale livestock. So that is looking at, smaller operations, smaller acreage offers. And there's going to be a change from that I'll mention here in a second when I hoover up all the changes that encapsulate Signup 207. But essentially, this is a self-certification that you are offering in a I believe it is under 200 acres at one time into the program, and then under 100 animal units. And then I'll talk about one of the changes there. Again, this is self-certification. FSA does not go out and count your livestock, but we can look at the acreage amounts. If it doesn't pass the straight face test, we have a different conversation, just like with everything else. And so the last ranking factor is cost. The first one is going to be if you are in a county where the maximum rental rate is under $15 an acre, you're going to get some points from that. And then the second place is one of the few places where you as a participant can affect your offer. And that is to accept less than the minimum rent or the maximum rental rate. I apologize. So this table talks about what sort of points you get based on how much less from that maximum rate that you're willing to take. I will mention that cost taps out at 25 points. So if you are in the West where rates are generally lower than they have been in previous signups, you're going to get some points from F7A. So it behooves you to do a little bit of back and napkin math to make sure that you don't drop yourself below that maximum 25 points. I will tell you, for a variety of reasons, folks do this every sign up. They take less than the maximum, and sometimes they get themselves a little discombobulated on how many points they go down below. So that's, quick and dirty rank. I'm going to say that the places that you're going to be able to affect your score is going to be F7, and then coming back up here at the top, 3C, you can pick up 5 points if you choose a 15-year contract from a 10-year contract. If you only want a 10-year contract, more power to you. Those are just places where you can affect your score. And then the vegetative cover, again, that's going to depend on what's out there, but that's a place where you can get some different points as well. A lot of the other ranking factors are looking at the land as it exists at the time of the offer. So if you're going to offer a square school section or something like, that's static. You obviously can't pick it up and put it in the priority zone if that's, if you're close to the priority zone. There aren't a ton of places where you can directly affect the score after, you start talking about this is the land I want versus this is the land I don't want. And I realize that I am running long, so I'm going to go quickly through changes in the sign up, and then I'll kick it over to Jim because the planning conversation is super important. So very quickly, changes from this sign up, from the last sign up. The main one, the one that's going to cause the most potential heartache, is that our rental rates have changed. For the last couple of signups, we offered a minimum rental rate, and that was looking at administrative priorities and conservation, trying to encourage those conservation actions across the country. This year, our USDA leadership chose to go with no minimum rental rate, and instead, we're looking straight at the Natural Agricultural Statistics Service Pasture Land Survey. That's an annual survey that goes out. And then we are statutorily required to take 75% of that. That means that in some areas, rental rates have gone down, in some places significantly, but it's accurately reflecting what is being reported to USDA as the pasture value on that land. And so, we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of the public money, of the, public funds, but at the same time, encouraging folks to look at, if this is what your land is worth, this is what we want to pay as a rental rate, to encourage you to continue conserving that land, or encourage you to continue using the land the way that you. So that's change one. Change two is going to be the removal of what used to be the F2 ranking factor. So that looked at traditionally underserved producers, including women, minorities, ethnic groups, that sort of thing. And then also beginning farmers, veteran farmers, and limited resource farmers. Again, that change was made to really focus our efforts on conservation at the land. That is what we're conserving here, is the grass, or the grass forest lagoons, the stand there. So that was a big place where, depending on the makeup of your entity or how you're choosing to participate, you would receive some points there. Those points are not available for sign up 207, but it is across the board. So it is an equal plan. And then the third thing is, like I mentioned, there was just some small kind of more administrative changes to the small scale livestock certification for reasons that I don't have the time to go into. CRP had different animal unit equivalents for livestock than every other FSA program. And this year we finally got in line with the rest of the FSA programs. So if you are familiar with livestock forage, emergency livestock assistance, anything like that, non-insured disaster assistance program, all of that stuff, these numbers now look exactly the same. So they should make a ton more sense. Just trying to streamline and uniform our numbers across the program. So, I mean, those are going to be the three major changes. And then, like I mentioned, we've got those two national priority areas, one of which heavily impacts the migratory corridor in Northwest Wyoming up. And then there is a 4-state area where there was, traditionally, we have colloquially referred to it as the Dust Bowl area, but it's high wind erosion. All of those counties offer an additional $5 per acre rental rate. I think that is enough to get us going into Jim's bit about conservation planning.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm just going to sort of reiterate a couple of things you mentioned. So you guys are coming up on the statutory cap. So you're only able to enroll a fraction of the acres that you have in previous years. And I think that's about 1.8 million across the country, right?
Yeah. And that 1.8, I need to stress, is not just for grassland. So, we have concluded our general CRP sign up for the year. Continuous sign up is ongoing for a short little while longer. That includes CREP and SAFE, depending on where you are in the world. And then obviously grassland as well. So we have a lot of things going on vying for the same small pot of acres.
Right. So it's very competitive. And we know there's a national priority area and there's state priority areas, and Jim will talk about those more. But I just want folks to know that it's a very competitive sign up, and there's only a couple of places in the application where you can make your application worth more points or make it more competitive. And I believe the cutoff score for the last year's sign up was 82. Before that, it was like in the 70s and then the 60s. So each year, the cutoff, everybody gets a value for their application based off those ranking factors that Patrick just explained. And that value is what the Secretary of Ag uses to say, okay, everybody with this value and above, they offer contracts to, and everybody below, you're not into it. So it is highly competitive. So I just want to make sure people know that. And we'll talk about the rental rates later. I have a map to show you all, and we can talk about that a little bit. For now, since we're a little bit behind, Jim, thank you for speaking on behalf of the NRCS. I'll let you talk about the role of the NRCS and the planning that goes on from that agency.
Okay. So again, thanks for having me. As far as NRCS's role, for some of you who may not know, NRCS is the technical agency for the FSA. And so for technical assessments, the FSA refers to NRCS to handle these assessments. So NRCS's role in this program is to go out on the land and verify that the land is eligible for the program. One of the factors is the amount of tree cover, so we verify that. They also put together a conservation plan for the FSA, and that's part of the requirements of getting the land enrolled. In that conservation plan is where you as a producer, it's important that if you're thinking about enrolling some of your lands in CRP grasslands, that you've got to speak up in this process about any needs you may have on the land. Like Patrick mentioned, cross fencing, pipelines, watering facilities, things like that are going to facilitate a good grazing management plan for the acres that you're enrolling. And in New Mexico, 90% of New Mexico is rangelands, and there's very little cropland. So most of the lands going into CRP grassland are rangelands. And so we verify that they're not only rangelands, but grasslands, because rangelands is pretty broad. And I can go over some of the priority areas too, but I guess since we're talking about it, there are some drawbacks to enrolling your lands in CRP grasslands. If your lands need a lot of range improvements like pipelines and watering facilities and cross fences, things like that, the cost share rate is 50%, whereas through the EQIP program, it's a higher cost share rate. And so once your lands are enrolled in CRP grasslands, they're no longer eligible for program, which has a higher cost share rate. And so that's something to consider when enrolling your lands into CRP grasslands. If there's quite a bit of improvements to make through, say, the EQIP program, then it might be worth your while to do all those improvements and then enroll it into CRP grasslands in a later sign up.
Say I want to enroll some lands and I met the cutoff and I'm working with the NRCS planners on my management plan. And there's a spot, say I want to put up a boundary wildlife friendly fence. We know EQIP cost shares on that. FSA doesn't. What if I exclude where I'm going to put, where I first see I want to use EQIP from the land I enroll in Grassland CRP? Would that be a potential strategy to access that cost share for the wildlife friendly fence?
Can be, as far as I've seen, it's been done, not specifically your scenario, but as the producer, you decide what lands you want enrolled in, what lands you don't want enrolled in, why you want it that way is your business. I could think of this program's been really good in New Mexico, and as is mentioned already, it's very highly competitive. In the first few, I guess I could talk about our priority areas, and I've got a slideshow of how those came about. Okay, so in New Mexico, we designated certain counties a state priority area and our national priority area already, and I'll explain to you how that came about. So in New Mexico, we're really big on grassland conservation because that's our bread and butter as ranchers. And with 90% of our lands being rangelands, that's the majority of the use of the state is livestock grazing. In this, so we've got what we call the Central Grassland region, and part of that is in New Mexico. And the map on the left shows you the entire Central Grassland region, and the map on the right shows you part of New Mexico that is within that Central Grassland region. What we're dealing with more than development in New Mexico is we're dealing with woody species encroachment. We're losing our grasslands really fast to woody species encroachment. And for that reason, we made this Central Grassland region a priority area for New Mexico. Part of this region was already part of the national priority zone, and you can see these counties in orange. And that was all because it was part of the Dust Bowl zone. And the first year, our state priority area ended up looking like this map on the green in the left. And it did fall within this Central Grassland region, but it overlapped in a lot of ways with the national priority area. So what we did is we took the remaining states that were part of the Central Grassland region. The remaining counties that were part of the Central Grassland region, but were not part of the national priority area, and made a state priority area to look like the states in blue are our state priority area, and on the right it shows all three layers together. Our Central Grassland region, which with both the state and national priority areas in. So that's how this priority area came about. If your county falls within the Central Grassland region, you should get state priority ranking points or national priority ranking points. And part of that is, like I said, we're big on conserving these grasslands and really all grasslands in New Mexico. And so that's how that map came. Now I'll take it a step further because the program was so competitive in the beginning, and still is. We were getting a lot of lands that were very degraded and hardly a grassland anymore. Like I said, we deal with woody species encroachment here. In this central grassland region, our woody species encroachment comes from either juniper trees or mesquite brush or sand sagebrush in some areas, mostly mesquite and juniper trees. The juniper trees were pretty cut and dry. They were a tree and the 5% cover. If you have more than 5% cover of juniper trees, then the lands were ineligible. Because it was so competitive, we took it a step further here in New Mexico, and we were getting a lot of lands in year one that looked like this, very much encroached by mesquite and hardly a grassland anymore, mostly bare ground. We took it a step further, and when the NRCS planner goes out and verifies eligibility, if the lands have a low infestation, a medium infestation to a heavy infestation of woody species such as this mesquite here, that we pretty much counted them as tree cover, because what was happening is we were getting a lot of lands enrolled in the program that weren't even a grassland anymore. And it really contradicted the whole purpose of the program. Now, on the other hand, we do a lot of woody species treatments, and I don't know, this picture's not that great. I hope you can see it. Lands that have already been treated, they were really encroached by a mesquite, but have already been treated, and the problem has been addressed. Even if they were a heavy infestation, but they were already treated, like this picture below, then they are eligible. And what this has really done for New Mexico is it has created one more incentive for people to get their grasslands back in order, have a whole other incentive to conserve their grasslands and actively fight this woody species encroachment that's going on. For example, on our own ranch, the part of the ranch that is eligible had juniper trees, and my dad took it upon himself to just go and get rid of all his juniper trees out of pocket just to make his lands eligible for CRP grasslands. So it was one more incentive to keep your lands in a healthy state. And he was able to get that portion of the ranch cleared of juniper trees and eligible for the program. And he is actively working on clearing other parts of the ranch and turning them back into a grassland so that the lands are eligible for this CRP grassland program, because it is, or at least in the past, it has been really, the rental rates have been really good and worth a guy's while to do so. It's my understanding those rates have changed since then.
We have about 4 more minutes, and I want to make sure that you, again, kind of just summarize, maybe in less than a minute, the role of the NRCS after a producer ranks high enough to be accepted into the program. Just talk about that management plan again and what the producers are on the hook for. And then I want to ask you some questions from a landowner perspective. So we got about 4 minutes before we tie this up and do Q&A. So if you could do that, that would be great.
Okay. So the beauty of the program is that grazing management plan, a reasonable grazing management plan, is the NRCS's role in helping the producer put together, which is very easy to do relative to some of the other programs landowner might enroll their land into, the CSP program, for example, which is also a great program, but it requires a lot more, I guess, compliance things you got to comply with to be eligible and to stay eligible. And the maximum payment rate you can get on a CSP, for example, is about $40,000 a year for 5 years, versus a maximum rate of $50,000 a year for up to 15 years. And so that makes it a lot more appealing to a landowner in New Mexico anyway. And so a grazing management plan, a reasonable grazing plan, is really all that you've got to comply with to stay eligible and keep your lands in a healthy state.
Great. Thank you. So tell us, what was it like entering the program as a landowner? what has it, what, how many payments have you received? What have you done different, if at all? I know a lot of producers, the NRCS copies their management plan that they already have because they already have good grass and are doing the right thing. So tell us what that experience is like and if there were any changes in your operation because you enrolled in Grassland CRP.
First, spoke about a little bit in getting rid of all the juniper trees that were making those lands ineligible. That was before the land ever made it into the program, but it was a good enough incentive to do so. So that was a big change. The other one that we would do different on these lands that have already been is to make sure that we've got all the improvements that we need on the land to make our grazing operation work. And there were a couple of pipelines that would have really helped us do what we're trying to do here, because we've switched from a simple rotation to a more intensive grazing management on that particular ranch, and the demand for water has increased quite a bit because the entire herd is in one herd now. And we would have tied a few more wells into the entire system to keep up with the demand of the cattle. That's one thing I would do different had looking back. So now we'll have to do that out of pocket or find another way to make those improvements. So that's why I really emphasize that if your lands need a lot of range improvements that you would have otherwise done, I encourage you to do them first before you enroll, because you immediately become ineligible for on those acres. That's really it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the AGI waiver, and maybe Patrick can answer this too, or the AGI cap or limitations. I know there has been a waiver in the past. If there is a waiver, what do you need to fill out? What goes on there? Because obviously the $900,000 AGI limit does not accurately reflect really what people are making often on these operations, and they come with a lot of, expenses. So can you guys talk about that for our participants?
Sure. So to quickly answer Dan's question in the chat, yes, the $900,000 adjusted gross income limitation applies. We apply slightly different than in annual programs, where we look at the beginning of the contract and then snapshot it. So that's when we look at it for that particular CRP contract. If you are offering in acreage every couple of years or something like that, then we would look again. As Shaleas mentioned, there is a process that the secretary of the department can provide a waiver to certain folks based on the critical nature of the extreme environmental sensitivity of the land being offered. And over the last couple of years, because of the focus that we have had in the big game migratory corridor between us and NRCS, their previous secretary did approve some of those waivers. Essentially, the process is going to be that some additional information beyond just the one AGI certification, and then a written request will be made through the county office, and then it slowly but surely works its way up to more for review of what the secretary wants to do. We haven't received any of those requests under this administration, so I don't know what the new secretary is going to want to do there, but the process still exists. I'm going to steal a mic for just a second. One thing I forgot to mention: the authority for us to enroll CRP ends on September 30 of this year, since we do not have another farm bill or other piece of legislation. So we, have a truncated timeline this year to get everything in. And then at this point, we're not sure of being able to accept new land past that. We will continue on every contract, that goes in. Every contract that we have now will service them through expiration. We're just not sure what the future is going to bring for fall.
Yeah. So unless there's a new farm bill that passes, this could very well be the last CRP sign up until there's a new farm bill.
Correct. And in the last couple of years where we've had expiration and then 1 year extensions of the farm bill, we have done this dance where we lose authority for a certain number of time couple of months. I believe the longest one was almost 6 months. And then we, as soon as we get authority, we go back to what we want to do, which is enroll acres and protect land.
I also see a question in the chat that asks if your land is already enrolled in CSP or does it make you ineligible? The answer in New Mexico anyway is no, but you can't have them both enrolled at the same time. So you can drop your CSP contract and your EQIP contract and enroll it into CRP Grassland if it's worth your while. NRCS has interpreted CRP Grasslands to be what we call a higher level of conservation. And so for that reason, we are allowing people to drop their CSP or their EQIP without having to pay those funds back if they're halfway through their contract, for example.
Are there any other questions from the people that are online? You're welcome to drop them in the chat. And so I see one here from Claire. Would state or federal lease lands to private ranchers be able to qualify for, do you mean CSP or Grassland CRP, Claire?
I meant CRP. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
So federal land is ineligible, but state land is eligible. There are only a couple of instances where the state entity, actually the state entity is not going to receive a payment, but yes, state land is eligible. Conservation easements are a good time, and I would love to talk about them for several more hours that we don't have time for. But Shaleas might have a recorded webinar where I did talk for a long time. It's going to be case by case basis, depending on the language of your easement. So I'm gonna encourage you to work with your local county office, and then I will probably end up getting to read your easement as well to figure that out.
Basically, if your easement says you can't convert your land to crops, you don't qualify for Grassland CRP because in essence, that's what CRP is paying you for. And I know that works a bit different here when we have native rangeland in the West because the threat to crops is less likely because we don't have water. But get your easement into the local FSA office and they will kick it up the chain of command. And as well as an AGI waiver. And I just want to say, if you run into any issues or questions, you have my email and I can filter those questions to Patrick or connect you to Patrick or the local state folks. Just know that consider us a resource. It is time consuming to do all of the paperwork and it can get cumbersome with the NRCS management planning. Just know that if you do get enrolled in the program, and I should knock on wood when I say this, I have not had a landowner complain about the program once enrolled. They've never been like, man, these guys are really riding me. I mean, it really rewards those that have good grass and that are doing the right thing. I will say that I did have an accountant call me from a landowner who sold his land to somebody that was under CRP, Grassland CRP, and that new landowner subdivided it. And so that old landowner who entered the contract is on the hook for repaying that money because they have violated a contract. So just know that you are entering into a legally binding contract with the USDA. And it's important to know what the repercussions are if you violate that contract. And the main thing is that you can't turn it into row crops and you can't subdivide it. So I just want to stress that it is important to know. And most people enter this program because they want to receive payment for the good stewardship that they're doing, and they want to continue to stay on the land. And we certainly support those goals here. So any other questions as I'm rambling here? I see there's one comment in the chat. Nope. Any other questions? I guess
And I will mention too that, that if you guys think of more questions afterwards, please contact WLA. My email is just my name at USDA.gov. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. This is gig. So, don't feel like this is the only time that you can utilize and it's in the chat now, that you can utilize the reference, the resources here for sure.
I am going to use some time here to talk about these priority areas. I don't think we've shown a map yet. So these are the national priority areas. And again, if you're in a priority area, you get extra points in your application. There are national priority areas and there are state priority areas, state wildlife and state grassland zones. So just know that if you're in these areas, there's a more likely chance that you're going to be competitive in the program and be able to enroll. And these priority areas are created because the agency is funneling resources to really important ecological areas. We have the greater Yellowstone ecosystem up here in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, where I'm from. I have really done some outreach into these areas in Wyoming, especially so landowners know about this program. And we've had really successful signups. Also, you get $5 extra per acre when you're in these zones. And that rental rate is reflected in the resources that we've provided. And so we also have this area called the Dust Bowl Priority Zone. I think we've talked about that. I want to pull up a map right now. And so here you can actually see the changes from 2024 to 2025. And I'll go to Park County here. This is where I'm from. So last year is $18 an acre. This year it's 14. And if I go down, let's go down to New Mexico. Right now in Lincoln County, New Mexico, the rental rate is $1. And that is, I don't know, that's really disappointing to us. That is not a meaningful rental rate for the producers who have good grass and important land there, when last year it was $13 an acre. WLA will be having conversations in the next farm bill, but us as producers, we need to really ask for meaningful rental rates for the stewardship of these grasslands, because we're losing them at an alarming rate, and they provide really important wildlife habitat that's not reflected in the formula that the USDA uses and is using right now for pasture rental rates. So I'll pause and see if anybody has questions.
And I'll go to Mark's question, which I should have covered when I spent most of the hour we have talking. So in the last couple of signups, yes, FSA offered the flexibility to participate in both EQIP and CRP grasslands in Wyoming. And then in the last signup, we extended that out to Idaho and Montana as well. Due to continued concerns about duplicative payments and honestly underwhelming demand, agency leadership decided not to offer that flexibility for signup 207.
Thanks for clarifying that, Patrick.
I have a question about a comment you made, Shaleas, about the violation when the land changed ownership. I understand that conceptually. So is it the case that all land that's entered in this Grassland CRP program, the duration of the contract is the legally binding thing, no matter who it might be sold to? That sounds very stringent to me, and I just want to clarify that I'm understanding correctly.
Let me jump in if you don't mind. Owners can change. Tenants can change. It's easier for everyone if it doesn't. But if the land sells and the new owner wants to participate, we want to keep the contract going. If the lessee on the land changes and everyone wants to keep going, we want the contract to keep going. If the new owners don't want to move forward, then there's going to be conversations about potentially money being paid back or what's going to happen with the contract. But no, it is not static throughout the life. If something on the ground changes, we are going to try and move with that if everyone wants to keep going.
So to follow up, what if the future landowner doesn't want it, doesn't find it valuable, this $1 in New Mexico case is kind of insulting to them, frankly, economically, and they want to discontinue the contract, is there still a penalty and USDA must be paid because that was entered into by the original owner? Okay, good. That's
You are
like,
correct.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah. So landowners that have previously enrolled in this program, for example, when it was $13 an acre, that $13 an acre is the payment that they receive for the duration of the contract, regardless of what these new signups offer. So when you close a contract, that payment rate isn't going to change. So the folks that were lucky enough to enroll their land in the last 3 years that got high payment rates in the West, good for them. We're going to still be advocating really hard to get that minimum rental rate back up, whether it's in the new farm bill or conversations with the USDA and the secretary right now. We're going to try. It might be an uphill battle, but just know that we need landowners and continue to use your voices to really ask for meaningful stewardship payments of these lands. And thanks for showing your interest, and we need to continue to do that together. We're at time. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Jim, for your expertise in answering our questions. I want to thank all of our members, landowners, land managers, and our partners who are here today. And you will be receiving an email and a recording of this. And please reach out to myself and Patrick if you have any questions, and Jim as well. Bye.